Hello, Peppers. Welcome to PEP. This is a very special no vision episode of PEP. Do you call it a special? I don't know. You have to use your imagination on this one because, unfortunately, the hand of God, John Schmitty Schmidt, he's found other heavenly body parts to play with today. So the hand of God is not available, unfortunately. So we're recording this in 2SER. Thank you very much, 2SER, for your generosity. But it's a new game, Dr. Dave.
Yep.
Tell us who you are, Dr. Dave.
I am Dr. David Smith.
Yeah. What do you do, Dr. David Smith?
I'm a political scientist.
Excellent.
I have a PhD in political science from the University of Michigan.
Okay. And I am Chaz Joe, I am 6'8", and you don't know any better because you can't see me. And Dr. Dave, by the way, he's hit the gym. He's got bulging muscles this week.
That's right, yeah. My famously large arms are now, well, let's just say it's a good thing that you can't even see them because you would never recover.
Okay, let's get straight into it. Let's talk COVID. We spent a bit of time on the Friday show. For those who haven't seen it, ABC, Planet America, our Friday fireside chat from today. We talked quite a bit about COVID, and the reason for that is because the numbers are getting a little bit dire again, in particular deaths. America this week passed France on the deaths per capita list. In fact, they're actually catching up with Chile again, amazingly. That's surprising because Chile were flying ahead, but now America's on the way back. Texas, Florida, and California have now basically combined to become one New York, in that there's about 700 to 800 deaths a day from Texas, Florida, and California now. The deaths are going up, but the strange thing is the cases and hospitalizations are starting to go down. In particular, hospitalizations are starting to go down. Now, maybe that's just a strange confluence of time, that one's going down when the other's going up. Maybe it's about the data being dodgy, because this is 2 weeks after the handover from the CDC, who we don't think they're terribly competent, we don't think they're corrupt, to hand over to HHS, who then handed over the job directly to a private consortium to crunch their numbers for them, and we don't know what's going on. There's certainly suspicions. I've been reading a bit about this. I'm going to probably bring something to you guys in another week because I want to do a little bit more research before I sound off about this. But there are question marks about the data. So we'll just throw that out there. Regardless of that, though, whether the hospitalizations are going down or not, we should emphasise that different areas can be much worse than other areas. So, for example, in Texas, there's a place, Starr County, where they start off with 8 beds for COVID a few weeks back. Then it was 17, then it was 29. And then their judge wrote on Facebook, quote, "Unfortunately, Starr County Memorial Hospital has limited resources and our doctors are going to have to decide who receives treatment and who is sent home to die by their loved ones. This is what we did not want our community to experience." Well, I'm glad they didn't want that, but they've got it. Now, that doesn't mean the whole of Texas is falling apart, but at least in that particular locality, they're stretched. And there's probably more than one of a locality like that, I imagine.
Yeah.
But, that's the kind of thing which we haven't heard much of during this epidemic, which is a little bit dire. The exciting news, though, Dr. Dave, you'll be pleased to hear, is that America is now exporting coronavirus to other countries. Who said America doesn't make anything anymore? Okinawa was COVID-free. It only had 148 cases for the whole pandemic until the US troops threw a bunch of July 4 parties there with hundreds, if not thousands, of people attending. And now they've got hundreds of cases
the US has exported cases to Australia as well, the military base in Darwin.
Australia first. Well done. By the way, the military has 37,000 cases. So,
it's pretty dire.
Not just
you
Australia
can imagine, the military is definitely an institution where you can imagine it spreading very rapidly and with military efficiency.
There you go. Boom. There is a stat which I think, when we're not so sure about the other stats, I like to refer to, which is the percentage positive out of tests.
Yes.
And generally speaking, you want to have it less than 5%. Less than 10% is okay. More than 10% is becoming a problem. I'll just read out the states that are more than 10%. Arizona 22%, Mississippi 20.8%, Florida 19.4%, Alabama 19.1%, Idaho 18%, Kansas 17%, Nevada 13.9%, South Carolina 15%, Georgia 12.6%, Texas 11.5%, Missouri 10.9%, Iowa 10.4%. That's a lot of states, Dr. Dave, in case you missed that.
That is a lot. When we contrast it with New South Wales, which the other day got 7 cases out of 37,000 tests.
That's not 10% by my calculations.
No. The other metric that I'm really worried about with the testing that I think in many ways is as telling as those high positivity rates is how long it is taking for test results to come back.
Yeah, it's like a week in a lot of places.
In a lot of places, it's even longer. Now, there isn't any systematic data on this, but I've seen reports of someone got a test in Arizona on a friend of mine. Colleague got a test in Arizona on July 1st. It came back today.
Wow.
There are lots of places where about 10 days is the norm. And so what that indicates is that the testing system is
useless.
First of all, it's useless. If it's taking a month, it is completely useless. And second, it's completely overwhelmed. Yeah. So
Dave's learnt not to thump the table.
Not to thump the table in order to make a point, which is a lifelong habit.
Yeah. That's going to be a problem for you, Dave.
Yeah. Yeah, this is going to be a very painful podcast. Okay, so...
By the way, while we're throwing numbers around, do you know what New York's positive percentage is? Take a guess.
No idea.
1%. Things have changed in New York.
Yeah.
I should say, by the way, the Florida number, it was 19.4%, might be misleading because... according to Fox 35 News, over 200 Florida testing centers recently had a supposed positivity rate of 100%.
Wow.
And there was a huge amount of underreporting of negative tests. That's what was going on.
Yes.
Yeah. And in fact, they gave some examples. Orlando Veterans Medical Center's reported positivity rate of 76% was actually 6%. Orlando Health's positivity rate was only 9.4%, not 98% as in the report, and so on. Well, so at least Florida isn't biased in their incompetence.
I mean, we have documented in relentless detail on this podcast the kinds of problems with reporting. Like, remember a month or two ago when the CDC decided to mix together the results of COVID tests and antibody tests into one almighty and completely useless metric.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like the Avengers of tests, except it doesn't work like that.
Yeah. So test data in the US is just not very good.
Dave, how have we gotten this far? We're like 8 minutes into the podcast and we're talking about testing and you haven't mentioned Jared Kushner yet. Because he was definitely in the news this week.
He was in the news this week. There was an article that came out in Vanity Fair today.
There we go. I knew this was coming.
That had Twitter all abuzz just with this absolutely horrifying shit. Now, the article starts off by pointing out that Kushner actually wanted to develop a national testing infrastructure. Right? He had this real interest in developing the kinds of things that you see in other countries.
That's a healthy ambition.
Like the federal government distributing tests to places when they're in the most need and having centralized collection of data and all that stuff. Now,
what a hippie.
He didn't turn to public health experts or medical people or various other agencies that were working on this problem.
Who did he turn to?
His college friends.
Of course.
Most of whom are in banking or private equity or who are shady entrepreneurs or so you can't see.
But to be fair, they were very good at cheating at college. So
yes,
that's
succeed. Right. Now, so apparently they had an extremely productive WhatsApp group about this. They sourced 3.5 million tests from China via the UAE. They all turned out to be contaminated, but at least they tried. But then apparently, basically Kushner fell under the spell of his father-in-law, as people tend to do.
He's like a wizard.
Yes, because
the Harry Potter of presidents.
As we remember. But after a brief period of seriousness in the second half of March, by April, Trump was really back on this train of, testing itself is undesirable.
Yeah,
it makes Trump seem to think it made everything look worse than it actually was. But also, there was this belief that COVID was only killing people in blue states. So basically, Kushner came around to the point of view that there was no political benefit in a national response to COVID.
But now that's not the case. Almost every state they just read out is a red state.
Exactly. And I mean, my mind is just blown at the idea that they thought that it would stay contained within state borders in the US, especially as it's basically impossible to close state borders to each other.
Yeah.
In the US. It maybe a governor could demand that people from other states quarantine. Even that is kind of a constitutionally dubious proposition. You know, when that proposal was floated, but it's never actually been tried. Actually closing the borders to each other, complete non-starter. It's one thing you basically never even see discussed in the US. So under those circumstances, and there is so much internal mobility in the United States, how they ever thought that this would stay contained to blue states is just beyond me, unless they were operating from fairly kind of racialized assumptions about, you know, who this virus really affects. But yeah, the belief was that because it was, as far as they saw, just a blue state disease, the better political response was to leave it to the states, let the states take the blame, that there was no political gain in having a national response.
Well, that really worked out well, didn't it?
Yeah. Anyway, I highly recommend that article.
Is that in the homework?
Yeah, let's stick that in the homework.
I'll put that in the homework. I'll make a little note.
If you haven't already exhausted your 3 free Vanity Fair articles for the month.
Here we go. I'm making the notes.
Is worth looking at.
Okay. All right. Normally the hand of God makes these notes, but so you can hear me typing away there. All right. I suppose what this leads into then, if we're talking about the pushings of the
pushings. I think you've just made up a new word.
It's a good word though. Do you think you can use the word pushings by the end of this podcast? You just did. There you go.
It sounds like a really waspy surname, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Pushings was the lacrosse captain.
Pushings Bottomley. Yeah. The pushings of the administration are now very much about schools, of course.
Yes.
I saw something interesting the other day about this, which is Israel. Did you see about Israel?
No.
Israel didn't have much of a COVID situation until quite recently. In fact, it was much like Australia, where they had
Israel wanted to have like a travel bubble with Australia.
Yeah. Well, basically they had a pathetic sort of mini spike, which wasn't much compared to the rest of the world, and then petered out, and it was looking good. You know, they had like 8 cases, 9 cases.
Yep.
Then they had this heat wave.
Yeah.
And they were wearing masks and so forth.
Yes.
But then they had this heat wave, and in there they opened their schools during the heat wave. And they took off the masks. They're uncomfortable. And it turned out that what they think happened was a certain number of schools spread it through the air conditioning because all the air was basically circulated through air conditioning. No doors were open. There was a heat wave, and none of the kids were wearing masks. And then a bunch of schools got it, and then that spread around the rest of the community, and now they're in a massive spike.
Yes.
And a number of people are drawing attention to that, saying maybe we shouldn't reopen our schools in the middle of summer when no one's wearing masks.
Mm-hmm.
You know, given that's exactly what Israel did. And I'm not hearing a lot of people listening to them. That's just some lonely article. But yeah, I'll just throw that out there with the schools debate. The other thing I just want to say about the schools debate as well before we move on, you can jump in if you have something to say about it, but is Trump's threatening to cut off funds to the schools to try and get them to open, obviously, so then parents have free babysitters, they can go back to work, and the economy can come back, supposedly. But that's all right. He can stomp his feet and hit the podcast desk and make it shake. But federal funding of schools is like 8%.
Yes.
So they're not going to care.
No.
Like compared to your entire school having a pandemic.
Trump's always threatening to cut off fairly minuscule amounts of funding to things, like cutting off funding to universities. Same deal. Very little, very little federal funding. But because his supporters all labour under the delusion that everything is basically funded extravagantly by the federal government, it comes across as an effective threat to his supporters.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah, no, I don't think it is effective. But it comes off as effective to his supporters. That's right.
Yeah.
But I can sort of see where he's coming from a little bit in terms of desperation, where he's at with COVID, because I'm not sure if you've seen some of the polls, but in March, for instance, 36 to 23 blamed China for coronavirus versus Trump.
I did see this, yes.
Whereas by June, it was 31 to 35
yes.
blaming China to Trump. So now it's more Trump than China, and that's going south fast.
By the way, have you noticed his use of the term China virus? He keeps trying it. It doesn't stick.
No, it doesn't.
Only his very closest allies half-heartedly use the term as well. This is something he's tried to put into common use.
Yeah.
It just has not stuck. It hasn't replaced the actually widely used terms coronavirus and COVID. I'm sure it's very popular on pro-Trump Facebook pages.
I see it on Twitter, I'll tell you that.
But he has really not managed to engineer the discourse in the way that he wanted to.
I will, but on that note, on that sort of desperation note, you can see why he might be reaching for scapegoats. Like this week, we just talked on the Friday show about the hydroxy lady, the crazy hydroxy lady, Dr. Emmanuel. I won't go into her too much, but I just want to point out a couple of things on that because I've already backed over her quite a bit. First of all, I want to play an interview question from earlier this week with Barstool Sports, who's now the preeminent interviewer of the president.
Oh, they are the worst. Do we have to listen to this?
We do. We're not going to hear Barstool Sports. You're going to hear the president, which may be worse or better for you. I'm not sure. Okay. But this is what he had to say this week. You'll see why this is well-timed.
Do you ever tweet out and be like, wake up, be like, oh man, I wish I didn't send that one out?
Often, too often.
Yeah.
You know, it used to be in the old days before this, you'd write a letter and you'd say, this letter's really bad. You put it on your desk and then you go back tomorrow and you say, oh, I'm glad I didn't send it, right? But we don't do that with Twitter, right? We put it out instantaneously, we feel great, and then you start getting phone calls. Did you really say this? I say, what's wrong with that? And you find a lot of things. You know what I find? It's not the tweets, it's the retweets that get you in trouble.
You've been caught with retweeting. People be like, oh, you just retweeted this crazy person. So you don't even look. You just press the retweet. Well, you just fire from the hip.
You see something that looks good, and you don't investigate it, and you don't look at what's on the helmet exactly, right, which is in miniature, and you don't blow it up. And sometimes it's, but I have found almost always, it's the retweets that get you in trouble.
I like the way he makes up words like helmet. That's his version of pushings. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's the retweets that get you in trouble.
Retweets have got Trump in trouble a number of times. So generally the times when there's been the most blatantly racist imagery as opposed to language, that's been from retweets. So that's things like the Star of David on the pile of money. So I can see what he's getting at there. But no, Trump's own words are generally what actually gets him in the most trouble.
I'm not saying they're great. I'm just saying that this week, Dr. Emmanuel, that was one of those retweets he was talking about only days earlier, where he retweeted a crazy person who was raving at the mouth about demon sex and alien DNA, and he didn't bother to check that before he retweeted it.
My favourite bit of that whole story, I don't know if you talked about it on the Fireside chat, is that, so this was Will Sommer from the Daily Beast, had the comprehensive write-up of this. Yeah. By the way, Will Sommer is one of the most prolific reporters that there is on the far right in America, and on QAnon, and on the sort of right-wing grift industry. In general, he's very good. I highly recommend following him. So, he had this great write-up of Stella Emanuel, and she actually then quote tweeted, "Great job from the Daily Beast about shedding light on the problems of incubus and succubus." Yes, thank you.
I did mention it on the Friday show. I cited that as actually my biggest concern.
Yeah.
I'm not concerned about the fact she believes crazy shit. I'm more concerned about the fact she thinks other people saying she believes crazy shit is a compliment of some kind.
Yeah. Now, one of the effects that had was no one could then say that the Daily Beast story was fake news.
No.
Now, Tucker Carlson kind of tried.
Yeah.
He did this very disingenuous, the Daily Beast criticized her for getting her medical degree from Africa. It's like, no, that was not the thrust of the article. Look, it was a lot more about demon sex and incubus and succubus. Would point out, though, so she's from Nigeria.
Yes, she is.
Nigeria, a country, entry into the United States with a visa from Nigeria has been dramatically restricted this year. There are a lot of Nigerian doctors in America. Nigerians...
That might not be a good thing, given that she's a Nigerian doctor.
Nigerians, measured by sort of trajectories of upward mobility, are one of the most successful migrant groups.
Yes, they are.
In America.
They are.
They're almost stereotyped as a community from which a lot of doctors come.
I'm pretty sure they have the highest proportion of degrees out of all immigrants into America.
Yeah.
They're right up there, at least.
She is not representative Nigerian doctor. Most Nigerian American doctors are not like that. That's not what the complaint was. And by the way, Tucker, it's your friend Trump following your immigration prescriptions who is now cutting off future Stella Emanuels from the United States.
I'm going to draw a word picture for you guys. Dr. Dave was just speaking to a fictional Tucker Carlson then. He was actually speaking down at him and giving him a piece of his mind.
I was pointing my finger at Tucker Carlson.
Actually, talking about the right-wing QAnon crazies, I'm not sure if you saw the One American News Network report on QAnon. I'm sure Trump did. I'd like to play you a clip from that as well, actually.
Please do.
Because this, to me, sums up, like this and Dr. Emanuel sums up kind of the problem.
But a growing number of Americans may be doing their own research, as reports also say QAnon is becoming a widely accepted system of beliefs, the new mainstream. Indeed, after years of revelations of high corruption in Washington and lies by Democrat media, QAnon ideas appear immensely popular.
See, that's what Trump watches on TV.
Yes.
That QAnon is mainstream and immensely popular.
Yeah.
And he takes that in. He takes in Dr. Emanuel, and it's a little worrying, isn't it?
Yeah, and now we're seeing this quite disingenuous thing at the fringes of conservative media, who they might not go as far as to say that QAnon's right, but they are going into this, but you can see why people believe it, right? Because, look at what's happened with Jeffrey Epstein and his circle of wealthy people. Like, why wouldn't people be buying into conspiracy theories about wealthy perverts? And, okay, so... there have been wealthy perversions forever. This is not a new thing. It's one of the cliches about rich people is that they do all this kind of shit because they can get away with it. I was rewatching Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut the other night, that's an entire movie based on that premise. No, it's about a very specific political narrative, which is specifically that there are all these Democratic Party figures engaging in this stuff, and that Trump is going to have them arrested.
Yes.
QAnon isn't some vague displacement of anti-elite resentment.
No.
QAnon is a very specific system of belief, and it's not actually defensible.
And Trump was going to put them away 2 years ago, and he's taking his time about it, apparently.
He's really taking his time.
Yeah, in a way, I'm kind of interested to see what happens if Trump loses this election, how they justify that Trump never chose to pull the pin on these millions of pedophiles he was going to put away.
As we've talked about before, in the book When Prophecy Fails, points out that when prophecy fails, yes, these systems of belief do tend to lose a few followers, but some remain. And those who remain become more tightly bonded to it than ever because they're so emotionally invested in it. And what people do is find a way to reconcile beliefs with events, right? This is the study that the term cognitive dissonance came from, right? So they're like, okay, well, maybe the prophecy is not exactly what we thought it was. Maybe losing the election is actually part of the plan for Trump, right? Bring more of these figures out into the open.
Playing the long game.
Whatever. There will definitely, though, be people who realise, if Trump loses the election that, the arrests are not going to happen. But there will be other people who are more tightly bonded to it than ever. Speaking of QAnon, today at some point, sort of either during John Lewis's funeral or just beforehand, Trump tweets out a promotion for a pizza place in Long Island.
Why?
Because the pizza place had...
hang on, is it that pizza place?
No. It's some Long Island pizzeria that, had put up a Trump flag or something and pissed off all the neighbours.
Oh, okay.
So Trump's like, go. Check out their great pizza. I'm yet to see exactly what the reaction from Q World is, but they must have gone nuts.
I'm sure
Trump actually mentioning the P word.
Yeah. I'm sure John Lewis would have appreciated it as well.
Yeah, John Lewis really would have appreciated. By the way, Trump did not tweet a word about John Lewis today. There was a heartfelt tribute to Herman Cain, but nothing about John Lewis.
I don't understand that at all. Like, it's not that hard to say.
It's really
R.I.P.
It's
John
really
Lewis.
not. I've seen Trump do pro forma bereavement.
Why would
tweets
Scavino,
before.
his social media guy, just hack into his Twitter? He's got the password and just tweet himself.
We all know. By the way, I'm sure this won't come as a shock to most of our listeners, but there's always a certain number of Trump tweets that clearly don't come from Trump. It's the sort of tweets that deal with these events.
It's just negligent unless Trump has made it known that he refuses to allow a tweet in his account, which would be insane. I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah, quite possibly.
I was just going to say, I mentioned this when I was talking about the crazies on the show today. The thing I was most worried about was where this goes with the vaccine.
Right, yes.
I found another poll. I saw the poll on the show today, but I've got one more.
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing I'm talking about. 30% of people would get the vaccine straight away if they could.
Mm-hmm.
Others would either wait or they wouldn't get it ever.
Right.
30%. 27% of 65s and over would get the vaccine if they could straight away.
Yeah.
That's what we're dealing with in America right now.
Yeah, although I will say, and
that's a CBS poll.
There have actually been other studies done in other countries which are producing some similarly alarming results.
So this is a world thing, not an America thing.
Maybe it's not a world thing. Maybe it's a rich country thing.
First world problems.
Yeah. I saw a study which hasn't been published yet, so I was here reviewing it, so I won't go into any details. It will be published.
You get all the exclusives.
It's a really good study, but that was about a certain wealthy European country where very similar problem.
Okay.
In quite similar numbers. We haven't done research about it in Australia yet, but some colleagues of mine at the University of Western Australia actually have some survey questions in the field at the moment. So I'll be able to report back to you on that in a few weeks.
How many studies do you peer review, by the way, Dave? Heaps?
Yeah.
You're just like the master of peer review.
No, I'm not the master. No, some people do way more than I do. There's a certain ratio that you should maintain around how many manuscripts you review compared to how many you submit. You should always be... it should always be multiples more that you're reviewing than you're submitting. But I like peer reviewing. It's a very important part of the job.
I would do peer review, but my peers write their reports in crayon. So let's leave that. Another example of the crazy, which I mentioned briefly on the show, was Louis Gohmert, who has just gotten COVID as well. And just to set the scene about Louis Gohmert, when it came out that he had COVID, Jake Sullivan reported on it for Politico. One of Louis Gohmert's staff emailed Jake Sullivan and said the following, quote, "Thank you for letting our office know Louis tested positive for coronavirus. When you write your story, can you include the fact that Louis requires full staff to be in the office, including 3 interns, so that we could, quote, be an example to America on how to open safely? When probing the office, you might want to ask how often people were berated for wearing masks."
Wow.
So that's Louis Gohmert.
Louis Gohmert is one of the most insufferable clowns in Congress. Like, I would rate him as the single worst speechmaker in Congress. Something exacerbated by how many speeches he actually makes.
Well, get a load of this speech, Dave,
because wait.
I've taken a clip from Louis Gohmert talking about his COVID diagnosis, and you'll be fascinated to hear the conclusion he draws about it.
But I can't help but think that if I hadn't been wearing a mask so much in the last 10 days or so, I really wonder if I would have gotten it. But I know, moving the mask around, getting it just right, I'm bound to put some virus on the mask that I sucked in. That's most likely what happened.
So most likely what happened is wearing a mask gave him
the virus.
That's most likely what happened. It's inspirational. I'm sure it's up there with Obama at John Lewis's funeral.
Yeah, I also wanted to just briefly mention someone else who he's an extraordinary character. He's someone that we've mentioned on the podcast before. He's not one of the people I would describe as one of my favourite figures, but I do need to give him credit for.
I can tell that because you're scowling.
Heading towards surely some kind of record for most number of times that any one person has contracted coronavirus. And that is Brazil's Jair Bolsonaro.
Has he just got it again, has he?
Yes, he's got it again.
How many times?
Today he told us he's got mold on his lungs.
Mold.
Yeah.
I thought the last I heard was that
This is at least the third time.
the last I heard was that all Brazilians were super athletes who drink urine. I think was it?
Swim in sewage.
Swim in sewage. Well, that's why he's got mold on his lungs. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, so now every photo that you see, there are so many photos of him now in hospital beds and with, things attached to his face.
I've got to catch up on that.
But as someone pointed out on Twitter, constantly getting the coronavirus that many times and never dying, it doesn't get much more strongman than that.
If someone was going to get the coronavirus 3 times, it would be Bolsonaro because he's that unclean.
Yeah.
While we're talking about the crazies, you mentioned Herman Cain.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have anything to say about that? We gave him.
This is just an awful story. Yeah. Really.
Sorry, just before you go, I just wanted to just be clear that I'm not laughing at him being dead. I made a point on the show that I don't like people doing that, but just
No, I would essentially see him as a victim of this idiocy. Right. So this is someone who, like Trump himself, he's a political performer. He was not one of Trump's highest ranking surrogates, but definitely one of his highest African-American surrogates. He was at the Trump rally in Tulsa. There was a photo of him with a bunch of other African-American supporters saying, here's black voices for Trump. None of them are wearing masks.
Yep.
Herman Cain is one of those very actively anti-mask voices. As far as I could tell, never wore one, refused to wear one. Even after he got diagnosed with coronavirus, was putting out statements about, that it's all overblown and we've just got to get through this. And then today, I was quite surprised to see he had actually died. And there's something really awful about it, that essentially he died as a result of this political performance.
Well, we don't know for a fact that he caught it there.
We don't know that he caught it there, but he was taking such a sort of principled he's 73 years old. He's in the demographic that should actually be, avoiding contact with potential sources of coronavirus as much as possible. He was not, and he was out there really flouting that and basically doing all of this for Trump's benefit. I'm sure that he believed it himself as well, but being seen in public in places like the Trump rally in Tulsa as much as this is a guy who has basically died for the Trump campaign, and that is just horrifying. Yeah. It's really awful.
It is. But while you're running hot there, we are talking about masks, and I've been for the past 3 weeks.
Yes, wanting me to.
Trying to bring us up now. I'm torn between recognising your bravery here, Dave, and making a logical and brave call way back 3 weeks ago.
Yes.
That Donald Trump would not wear a mask.
Yes.
And my desire to take the piss out of you because almost the very next day he wore a mask.
He did, yeah. It's the sort of thing that happens to anyone who makes a prediction about Trump, whether friend or foe. No, but I do want to talk about this because we also talked about in that same episode, good science and bad science.
Yes.
And, science that is good needs to recognise its mistakes. It needs to look at its theories, and when it sees contrary information to its theories, it needs to reconsider things. Okay, so, and I've been thinking about this a lot over the last 3 weeks because I've been expecting to talk about it at some point. It is there is a bit of difficulty trying to draw inferences from this though, because I thought when Trump wore the mask, I thought, okay, we're going to see him wearing a mask more often now. He has not. I think that is still the only time.
He tweeted out a woman saying you should never wear a mask.
Yeah, so the problem is now that as a sort of point of contrary data is becoming a smaller and smaller point. But nonetheless, it is an important point of contrary data to my contention that he was never going to wear a mask. And my theory was this was to do with his kind of charismatic style of leadership, basically seen to his followers someone who is uniquely gifted, has divine gifts, which are far more important than anything like scientific expertise. And I thought that he would not wear a mask because that would mean sort of yielding to the symbolic world of scientific expertise. Now, I have to say, some of the people who commented on the Facebook page that day were probably correct when they said, you're overthinking this a little bit.
That's our job.
And that, you're basically attributing too much thought to Trump. And I think that there is something to that. Yeah, he has probably not considered... I mean, he is an instinctually... charismatic leader. He's probably not someone who's thinking through the whole Weberian theory of, well, what should I be doing as a charismatic leader? So that's probably the first point. Yeah. Second point is that, so he was. It appears that he was driven to wear a mask by electoral considerations. Now, I didn't think that would happen because he seems to have so much faith in his own electoral judgment. Things like he just keeps bringing up dementia over and over again, even though that is clearly not a winning point for him. But he seems to think if he just hammers this enough times and things, so that's an example of where he just keeps pushing.
Although I do have an interesting poll about that coming up.
I thought that the mask would be another thing, that no, he would trust his judgment, that he just cannot have a change in image. But clearly, and the way that we know that he was persuaded to do this for electoral reasons was the way that his campaign staff reacted.
About them all pat him on the back.
Well, tweeting out.
Well done. Biden's finished.
Yeah, Biden's finished. Good night, Joe Biden. You had that ridiculous idiot who's contesting Congress somewhere, K.R. Williams, saying only Trump can actually wear this in a masculine way. Yeah. Like Trump's the only man who can pull this look off. Possibly. But all basically saying, like, who's the big, strong boy? Yes, please continue to wear this mask as it's killing us in the polls. So this is another point where I have to sort of modify the theory. It's like, no, clearly the polls are actually inducing enough existential terror in him at this point that he's actually questioning his own judgment. Which, come to think of it, which I should have realised, actually has happened quite a few times.
Yeah, he does that.
Periodically.
Briefly. And then he reverts. Yeah.
So basically, I was putting things in much too absolute terms, probably attributing far too much sort of thought to what was going on, and probably also not considering the way that the political context is changing pretty radically, even in ways that Trump can recognise. So even though I think it still does seem to be the case that he wants to avoid being seen in a mask as much as possible, it's not an absolute. It's not the kind of absolute he will never do this thing that I thought he was.
Well, look, I'm not at all your peer, but my review of that was very positive. I can't do stat nuggets, unfortunately, today because Schmidty isn't here with his sirens, but I'm going to do the next best thing. I'm going to do a fact nugget.
Fact nugget.
That's right.
Okay.
The fact nugget is just a random COVID fact. Well, not really COVID. You'll see.
Right.
I was reading this week about a 1991 erotic novel called Happy Endings. It was a romance about you're going to see where this is going very soon. A widowed first lady who falls head over heels for a dashing and cutting NIH scientist who, by the way, has recently discovered a therapy for AIDS, while a white-hot and secretive love affair takes wind. I think you can see where this is going.
Jesus.
Sally Quinn, the author of this erotic novel.
I've heard of this before, yeah.
She met Anthony Fauci at a Washington function in the 90s. And this is a quote. With his tie askew and from behind enormous glasses, Fauci left an impression of earnest brilliance, enough to inspire the main character of my upcoming novel. I just fell in love with him. Usually those dinners, you make polite conversation, that's it. But we had this intense conversation, personal conversation. I thought, wow, this guy's amazing. So I just tell you that, Dave, so you will never sleep again.
That is really disturbing. I do want to point something out.
Yes.
It's worth having a look at Jeet Heer's article in The Nation about how Anthony Fauci, over the course of his career, essentially developed his political strategy. And it points out that Fauci was, in many ways, in the 80s, the face of the Reagan administration's non-response to the AIDS crisis. the kinds of people that Fauci is popular with now, he was not popular with them at all in the 80s. But here points out that, so Larry Kramer, this major AIDS activist from New York, was berating him. And Fauci kind of privately got in touch with Larry Kramer and actually really brought him into the whole political process of dealing with AIDS. So Fauci went from being basically not the only face of non-response, because Reagan himself was just, he did not care. Reagan's press secretary was even worse. He used it as an opportunity to make homophobic jokes. But Fauci actually gradually went to becoming, the face of the response. Hence the fact that by 1991, people are writing erotic fanfic about him developing AIDS therapies.
That's coming for you soon, Dave. Not for me.
Yeah, so...
that's interesting, yeah. Is that homework to hear his article in The Nation?
Yes, I wish I could remember what the name of it was.
I'll find it.
I think it came out this week.
I'll try to find it at least.
Yes.
I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to skip the economic crunch update because that's the kind of thing which only I care about.
It is indeed
Heroes
a
Act
crunch.
and Heroes Act. It is a crunch. It's definitely a crunch.
Yeah.
If I've got time at the end, I'll come back to it.
We are saying the C word.
But I will say, just quickly on COVID before we move on, 2 studies which I found interesting this week.
Mm-hmm.
First one found, this is something you don't hear much about, the people who recover, what happens to them.
Yep.
And it found that cardiac magnetic resonance imaging revealed cardiac involvement in 78% of patients who recovered from COVID.
That's
and ongoing myocardial inflammation in 60% of patients who had recovered.
Yeah.
Which was, and get this, independent of pre-existing conditions, severity, and overall course of the acute illness, as in even asymptomatic people. And also time from the original diagnosis. It just stays there. It doesn't go away. So yeah, you don't want to get COVID, even if you're young and you're healthy and all the rest of it, and it's just the sniffles.
Yeah.
It might still have permanent heart damage.
It might.
So that's something to watch out for. I'll leave economic crunch maybe till the end. Maybe I'll do this on Wednesday if we have an extra podcast, which I think we will. Let's go to 2020. Are we going to have an election, Dave?
Of course, we are going to have an election. Now, I have been up since 3:30 this morning because I got a text from a friend who I went to grad school with in Michigan. She's German and she's now back in Munich. And she basically texted me to say, what the fuck is this?
You're referring to Trump's tweet.
Yes.
Suggesting a potential delayed election.
Yes. Trump's tweet reiterating his usual garbage about mail-in voting leading to massive fraud and then saying, delay the election until everyone is able to vote safely and securely. 3 question marks.
That's a lot of question marks.
Yeah. So, okay.
I guess it's highly questionable.
Highly questionable indeed. Now, there is a lot that needs to be said about this. Because, I mean, the first very obvious point is Trump has absolutely no control over elections.
Zero power.
At all.
It's a law.
Article 2 of the Constitution puts that firmly in the hands of Congress. Yes. I think that the law that established that the election takes place on the first Tuesday of November has remained unchanged since 1845.
That's good enough for me.
Yeah, and as has been widely pointed out today, in 1864, at a very tensely balanced moment of the Civil War, when it looked like Lincoln would lose the election still happened.
Abraham Lincoln's tweets were never censored, though.
No.
Never.
It happened in 1932 when there was 25% unemployment, and it happened in 1944 as the Second World War was nearing its climax. It is a very important feature of the United States system that elections always happen at the same time.
Yes.
That they happen regularly. Of course, this year there have actually been some state primaries that got delayed, but that's a completely different kettle of fish. Most importantly, because that's just a state issue that states are dealing with themselves. Okay. So, no, there's absolutely no chance that the election will be delayed. So and I'm sure that Trump knows this. So what was the significance of this tweet? Well, first and foremost, this is just his tactic of delegitimizing the election in advance.
Yeah.
Right. So he's saying he expects the mail voting fraud to be so bad that it would actually warrant delaying the election. Right. That is what this tweet was all about. It is part of this project of delegitimizing the election in advance.
And as I always say, whenever we bring this up,
Yeah.
is every likelihood that the mail-in voting is going to be a disaster, but not the way he's saying.
Absolutely.
Not about fraud.
That absolutely needs to be emphasized.
Yeah, like
yes.
Like even this week, the CBS did an experiment where they mailed out 200 ballots
Yes.
to see which ones turned up.
Yeah.
And after a week, 3% of them hadn't turned up. So
Yeah.
and that's what's going to happen. What's going to happen is people will miss out on votes.
Yes.
It's not going to be too many votes and fraud. It'll be not enough votes and people missing out.
Absolutely. And in a lot of really key states, there are rules saying that the ballot has to arrive before election day. And given that there are delays of up to 5 days at the moment, we don't know how long that's going to be around the election. Something else that we've talked about, the US Postal Service is basically under attack from the current Postmaster General, putting in all kinds of new efficiency requirements, such as banning overtime, which means you never get around to dealing with the backlog. This is all justified in the name of, the post office is facing a financial crisis. As we have pointed out on this show before, it's facing a financial crisis because of a piece of legislation cooked up in 2006 by Dennis Hastett's Congress and George W. Bush, basically a highly punitive piece of legislation that demanded that the entire pension fund of the post office be covered decades in advance, something that is not expected of any other business in America. So the post office, as a result, has perpetually been in a completely manufactured financial crisis ever since then. Sure, changing technology doesn't help, but that's not the main cause. The main cause is this punitive legislation. So there are going to be major problems with the post office. But fraud, not going to be a major problem based on every study that we have of exactly how low fraud is in mail-in voting. But one of the really interesting things about the effect that this tweet had was reporters rightly immediately went to every Republican legislator they could find and said, so, what is it? Do you support this? You're going to delay the election? Now, that made some conservatives quite unhappy. Senators were visibly trying to avoid reporters. A lot of senators claimed that they hadn't seen the tweet, but a lot of them did say, just straight off the bat, Mitch McConnell, most importantly, no, there's no way that election's going to be delayed. Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, not only did they say the election's not going to be delayed, they said they didn't think there was going to be any problem with the integrity of the election. I want the media to ferret out a response from every single relevant elected Republican,
Put it on the record.
both at the federal and the state level. Because if Trump is trying to delegitimize the election, his success in that endeavor, it doesn't depend on what his followers think. That doesn't really matter at all. Even if the militias get out, they're not going. It's not like they. It could cause some pretty horrific violence, but it's not like they're going to be any match for the United States military or even local police forces. In terms of the damage that could actually be done to the democratic system, what matters is how Trump's political allies actually respond.
Yes.
Do they stick with him or do they abandon him?
Because people take cues from those people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, and also just the way that the Constitution works, it essentially will always all come down to who's legislative allies. So... and as well as, because the one sort of nightmare scenario that's been talked about a lot is state governments as well. So what if governments in swing states that Republicans control the legislature, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Pennsylvania, what if they decide not to certify the election results and basically turn the decision over to the House of Representatives, which... in a historical quirk, if it's the House of Representatives that casts the vote on the president, it's not every representative for themselves. It's divided into state delegations, and it's whoever has the majority within the state delegation gets to decide. That would very narrowly give it to the Republicans, given the vagaries of American political geography. So, knowing what his allies, putting his allies on the record is very important. None other than Rich Lowry, last seen writing an article for National Review called "Where Does Ron DeSantis Go for His Apology?" He was whining about this on Twitter today. He was like, another day when senators have to run from journalists asking about some insane Trump tweet. Now, this is, first of all, that was a tweet where Trump essentially asked Congress to delay an election. If journalists weren't asking Republican senators what they thought about that, they really would not be doing their jobs. Something that Rich Lowry is very familiar with. But second, it relates to this tendency that we see it a lot, sometimes from conservatives, but we do see it more generally, especially from very well sort of established media veterans. It's this anachronistic kind of temptation to say Trump's tweets aren't, they're somehow not as real as other forms of speech, or that it's this sort of distracting sideshow, right? This is what a lot of people were saying today. Look, this is just distracting from the GDP numbers, this, 9.5% contraction. But I don't think it's a distraction from that at all, because it's not like that economic news is going to go away. People are living in it. So I wasn't worried about that in any way. But yeah, this tendency to see tweets as a distraction, as just this sideshow.
Well, in fact, on the Friday show today, you can hoe into me, because I was running the line myself, just saying. I mean, I argued against it, and I said why wouldn't make sense. But I said this delaying the election thing. This is just classic Trump. Doesn't know what the hell he's doing. He tweets out some piece of shit. He forgets about it as soon as he tweets it. We all get excited about it. He's moved on to tweeting some other crap, and just like that. That's the way I was talking about it. So
look, some of his tweets are like that. This was not one of those tweets. This was a tweet that actually allowed us to test what his allies are going to do.
Yeah, I know. I like your idea.
In the event of in the event that he delegitimizes the election,
it's a great opportunity.
This was part of a project of delegitimizing the election. Yes, some of his tweets are just him
brain farts
firing off or whatever. But the thing is, first of all, Trump's tweets constitute a significant proportion of what he has actually done as president.
It's true.
This is a man who has affected so many things by tweet that the Supreme Court has actually been forced to rule that tweets are a form of official statement. Second thing is, we get disoriented by the fact he's the first online president. When you are the most powerful person on earth, your words are actions. It is that simple. When you're the most powerful person on earth, everything that you say has consequences. This is why, traditionally, presidents have been extremely careful about what they have said. It's why when they say things publicly, it's released through very careful channels over which they have a lot of control. It's why presidents often sound so scripted and so workshopped or whatever. That's because they know that their words actually have consequences.
I wonder though if after 4 years of Trump that will be less so. Like gaffes, for Joe Biden's gaffes. If Joe Biden made the same gaffes 4 years ago, I dare say they would make a bigger impact. Whereas now people go, oh well, gaffes.
Possibly.
Yes.
Lowered the bar.
Yeah, I wonder if there's been a semi-permanent change. But anyway, keep on going.
One thing that I think we might have talked about before, this is a bit of a tangent, but you know who really hates Trump's tweets? US intelligence agencies. Yeah. Because can you imagine during the Cold War what the Soviets would have done to obtain constant real-time feed of what the president is thinking, feeling, watching on TV.
And who demons are having sex with.
Yeah, getting upset about. Trump just puts everything on the table.
He does.
So that his psyche is completely exposed to the entire world. That used to be seen as information that you actually have to guard quite carefully from opponents who might take advantage.
Well, the
of
fact
it.
that Lincoln Project is taking advantage of it suggests that
Yeah.
Russian intelligence might be able to.
Yeah. So, I mean, but this is another example of, because Trump is so different, the bar has been set very low. He's, Americans talk about him being graded on a curve. One of the few Republican senators who didn't sort of immediately condemn it after he knew about it was John Cornyn, who's another just absolute ass clown out of Texas. Who said, this is just a joke to make your heads explode.
Oh, I hate that.
No,
I hate that.
No, Trump pinned the tweet on his profile. This was not some...
He pinned it.
He pinned it.
I didn't know that.
He actually pinned it.
Okay,
He doesn't even usually pin... Or
that's
usually,
not a brain fart.
Usually pinned tweets are things that Scavino puts. I didn't even know that Trump knew about the pinning function.
Maybe that's what Scavino put up instead of a John Lewis RIP. God.
So he pinned this. He was like, "No, this is going to be an article of conversation here."
Yeah, well, it was.
Well,
talking about condemning people who condemn Trump and who don't, I could not believe when I saw. Did you see Steve Calabrese?
Yes.
Like just for those who don't know who Steve Calabrese is.
Yeah,
This guy has mega hack points. Like a year ago, he was literally arguing. Not just that Trump should stack the Supreme Court, but they should stack every court.
Yes.
He literally was arguing that every single court should be like double the number of people filled with Trump judges forever. Yeah. That is who Steve Calabrese is. And he was writing against this. And
he also said that the Mueller investigation was unconstitutional.
Yes.
And wrote op-eds against impeachment.
Easy.
Yeah.
He was a massive Trump fanboy like a year ago.
He's now saying this is an impeachable offence. Well, and, I mean, it was interesting the language that he used. He referred to this as fascistic. Not fascist, fascistic. Now,
I don't like that.
We talked last week about elements of Trumpism that are proximate to fascism. I would still maintain... I can't bring myself to see Trump himself as a fascist. No. He just doesn't have the scope of political vision.
Or the discipline.
Doesn't have the discipline, doesn't have the kind of revolutionary program that fascism has. I would say, though, that a lot of his following has morphed into a fascist following. It's politically, aesthetically, there really is a revolutionary program brewing among especially some of his armed followers. So he's fascist proximate, but a lot of Trumpism is going more and more towards full-blown fascism. But what is annoying me a lot is when people use the word fascism to mean authoritarian. Right? So what Trump's doing is this action is authoritarian. You can call for an election to be delayed. You can call an election off without being fascist. There have actually been very few fascist regimes in history. Italy was, Germany's Nazism is generally regarded as a species of fascism, although even that's often disputed. Some stretch it to argue that Imperial Japan was fascist. But, among scholars of fascism, they would even dispute that something like Franco in Spain was fascist. They're like, no, that's more a sort of very reactionary form of conservatism that flirted a bit with fascism. So, basically, capital F fascism is not a word to not a word to be taken lightly, and it really annoys me when people use it just to refer to authoritarianism, because this is how conservative figures often describe the left. Oh, it's fascist because they want to stop people from talking. Now, that might be authoritarian. That's not fascist. Fascism is a very distinctive political program.
And authoritarian is a wonderful word. People should use it more.
It is. And one of the things about authoritarianism is it can actually, it describes a sort of political mode that can describe a very wide range of political behaviours. And Trump certainly has got very authoritarian instincts.
He does.
Yeah.
That we could agree on.
But fascism is an ideology, and Trump does not have much in the way of ideology at all.
I want to move on briefly to Biden. And look, I got to say, I'm getting a little bit annoyed by his lack of in-depth interviews. Because, like this week, we heard about him.
I don't particularly want to hear any interviews with him, so I'm fine with it.
I understand your instincts, but it seems to me that essentially what he's doing is he is doing what he can get away with.
Yes.
Right? And as far this is
he refused to be interviewed by Chris Wallace.
Yes, this is what it is. This week it was Chris Wallace he said no to. And like Chris Wallace is not a hack. Chris Wallace is a good person to be interviewed by, I reckon, if you want a decent, tough, but fair interview. And I reckon, this is a very biased thing to say, I admit, but it's true. Lowering your standards to what you can get away with, that's Trump's thing. And Biden is meant to be the opposite of that. And he's not. That is the same thing that Trump does, and he's now, and Biden's pulling the trick here. In this particular, and I don't like it. I wish, I know he's getting away with it, but it annoys me. I will say this though, I do think that I will give him props for his campaign message at the moment, because this is, I give him props for admirable directness.
Okay.
I'm running because Trump is the president, and I think our democracy is at stake for real. And what seems to be the case is many Americans, those who don't like me and those who do, view me as the antithesis of Trump. And I believe that I am.
Vote for me because I'm not Trump.
Well, it works.
Yeah, it does.
It works.
I'll pay it. I'll pay it. He's not Trump. That is true. Even though, as I said, I think that little turn with not doing interviews is it's not what he's meant to be doing in my view. But I do want to get onto the polls with Biden.
Yes.
And that is the polls are tightening up. I'm not saying they're tight, but there's a few polls coming out now which are a little bit closer than they were. And before they were all 10 points, 15 points, 12 points. Like there's a couple now, especially swing state polls, which are becoming more like 3 points and 4 points. We just should acknowledge that. They're not the best polls. They're not high quality polls, but they exist.
Yeah.
But there's a really interesting poll I want to draw your attention to. I'm coming up to your skepticism corner here, so get ready.
Yes. Yes, you're taking skepticism corner this week.
I've got a little bit out on that, actually. The interesting poll was from a group I hadn't heard about, Avalanche, that do...
Avalanche?
I know,
Don't know about that, Chaz.
It might not be high quality, but they do...
I don't know about any firm that names itself after a disaster.
That's fair. That's fair.
It's earthquake poll.
Their theory they're running with is that Lafayette Square was a real turning point in the polling.
Right.
And this is what they brought to the table.
Mm-hmm.
If you in the last couple of weeks,
yes.
56% of hardcore vote Trump respondents are against the protests. That's not a big surprise.
Yes.
59% of the lean Trump set said that protesters were either completely or somewhat right. Mm-hmm. 72% of mixed feelings about the presidential race said the protesters were right as well. This is about 3 weeks ago.
Yes, yes.
So this is before the Portland stuff, right?
Yes.
Before it became big news. But this is what they said. The shifts between June the 1st and June the 11th were significant. And that's right in the middle of Lafayette Square.
I have heard this theory before. Yeah.
And the examples and what they said was that support for the protests grew 10 points amongst mixed feelings voters in that 10 days, 14 points amongst lean Biden voters, and 25 points amongst lean Trump voters.
Wow. Yeah.
So if that's the case...
It was a terrible move. It's one of those moments that reminded us Trump is not actually a strategic genius.
No.
He's been lucky a few times. That it was just a disaster. You could tell that it was going to be a disaster. Like, yes, it was going to play well with his Pentecostal base. But, Trump could go up to
He's got them.
The Lincoln Memorial and sit on Lincoln's lap and tell Lincoln all about how Trump, is a better president than Lincoln.
I'm surprised he hasn't done it yet.
And do it all in front of the cameras, and that would play well with his Pentecostal.
Yeah, he's got them.
Base.
I feel.
There was no one else responded well.
No.
To that. It was just bad. So, yeah, I do give some credence to the fact that was a turning point. And it's really interesting because you would expect in many ways that the pandemic is just such big and bad news that it overwhelms everything. But it actually became quite clear during the protests that it wasn't overwhelming everything. And it's really interesting that itself can be an even more significant turning point than all of the things that have gone wrong in the pandemic.
You heard it here first. Dr. Dave is now an Avalanche fanboy.
Total. Well, as I said, I'd heard that theory from other places.
Avalanche. Don't give any credit at all. I was just going, while we're talking about the polls, as you said, I am kind of in the skepticism corner world today.
Yes. So what do you got for us? Chaz in skepticism corner.
Well, I'm going to examine.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of a debunking of skepticism corner, unfortunately, but I'm going to examine are the polls biased theory.
Right. Yes.
At the end, I
think I can tell what the answer's going to be already, but
because New York Times Upshot, I'll put it in the homework so you can read for yourself, wrote a very good column about this. They made a lot of good points. Now I'm just going to rip them off, every single one of them. So don't even bother reading it, just listen. First of all, on the theory that too many Democrats have been sampled. I've discussed this before about the fact that sometimes it's a case of discouragement, etc. Registered Republicans, or those who participated in a Republican primary, turns out are actually 12% more likely to complete a response for the New York Times Siena. That's what they found. And that is, admittedly, they say, because they're older, rural, and white voters, and they're likely to complete interviews generally.
Yes.
But when you control for those factors, Republicans and Democrats are equally likely to respond. Mm-hmm. So there you go. They also note that even if that was the case, when you only get 86% of those who said they voted for you last time round, you're not going to poll very well.
No.
And that was the case for the New York Times Siena. So that is a good point.
Also worth pointing out, party registration is not the same thing as party identification.
Yes.
Three of the states with the highest Democratic Party registration are Louisiana, Kentucky, and West Virginia.
Yes.
Now, those are three states that do routinely elect Democratic officials at the state level, reflecting the sort of very long legacy of what was once one-party Democratic rule in those states. But it's been a very long time, 2000 at least, since any of them went blue. So if Republicans have an advantage even in registration in polls, that's bad.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, also on that note, some polls do weight by registration data or primary voting history as well.
Yeah.
For exactly these situations. And, let's look at the last three that did that. Monmouth poll, Biden plus 13.
Yes.
New York Times Siena poll, Biden plus 14. CBS YouGov poll, Biden plus 9. So there you go. So that is, I think the Upshot did a pretty good job dealing with that one. Do you have anything to add to Skepticism Corner before I throw one more thing into the mix there?
No.
No,
I would just more things to say about polls, but not to skepticism.
Okay, well, all I'd say is that Harry Enton made one more decent point, I thought, which is that it's very, very rare that elections are not won on the economy. Yes. Going back over time, there have only been a very small number of modern elections not about the economy.
Yes.
In every one of those elections, the candidate trusted most on that non-economic issue went on to win.
Right, so that does not bode well.
So what that means is that doesn't bode well for Trump right now with Corona, but it means if he can somehow pull Corona back, there's a way of getting back into it.
Right.
Of course, he's not going to do that.
No.
But I keep coming back to that vaccine. I just keep on thinking about that, and just if he could stick to a message for more than one day, but he's not going to, so why do I even say that? I'm wasting my breath. Go on, Dave.
Falling into the classic pundits fallacy about Trump. I mean, I suppose, there's basically very little sign of optimism in the COVID numbers at all. I think there is some sign of plateauing, which means that potentially in 3 months the numbers could be trending in the right directions. Although, then again, the fall is always when the second wave was actually expected to happen.
Yes,
and with
hasn't come yet.
With forced school reopenings, so it's COVID is not going to be a winning issue unless, a vaccine miraculously.
And to be honest, probably more than a vaccine. Like he needs to change his attitude.
Yeah, but I mean, on the economy, I think it is fairly clear, especially from the data that we're seeing today, that there isn't going to be a V-shaped recovery, that actually a lot of that economic damage is going to be permanent.
I'll talk more about that next podcast because I skipped it.
Okay, we are now beginning to see polls showing Biden ahead on economic management,
Yes.
which is pretty remarkable. But, the race is certainly not done yet. Looking at some of those states, for example. Now, there are some states where Trump really does seem to have lost control. So
Michigan, he's pulled out
news
advertising.
this week that, it's the campaign pulled out of Michigan. Yeah. The fact that they are now devoting resources to defending Ohio and Texas is obviously very bad news for the campaign. But there are some, what I've seen referred to as very inelastic states in that mix, like North Carolina, for example, where I don't think Biden has ever managed to have more than a 2 or 3% lead.
Constantly.
I would not regard that as a safe lead at all. I would actually...
Who cares? He doesn't need it.
I would virtually regard that as a Trump lead.
Yeah.
At this point, I think there is still the possibility that Democrats are going to get jazzed up about let's expand the map, let's take Arizona, let's make a play for Texas, let's make a play for Georgia.
Look, I'm sure they will, but who cares? Let's just remind the listeners: if they win if Biden wins Michigan and Pennsylvania, he just needs to win either Wisconsin or Arizona, and it's over. And if he wins Florida and Michigan, that's it.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to do skepticism.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, if we look at Florida, if Biden wins Florida, it's over. He's got the average poll lead there at the moment is 7.4%. That's like bigger than what I remember Obama having in the lead up to 2008. I remember when Florida, at some point in October 2008, the pundits basically said correctly, this is a dark blue state for the purposes of this election. So, at the moment, Biden does look very likely to win. But it is true that in general, in the swing states, if you take them as a whole, Biden's leads are softer there than they are at the national level.
I am going to, as much as I would like to skip past it, since I skipped past it last week, I'm going to very briefly dip into the Kanye watch.
Okay.
Because we just do need to just acknowledge that he exists. He is filed with the FEC for Illinois, New Jersey, Missouri, and Oklahoma now. Also filing in Oklahoma, I might add, was concert pianist Jade Simmons and cryptocurrency entrepreneur Brock Pierce. Didn't get so much media attention as Kanye did.
Brock Pierce.
That's right. He's trying to get on New York's ballot today. I don't know if he got there or not. He needed 30,000 signatures. I checked just beforehand and I couldn't find any news on that. Although last week he tweeted and asked for people to sign his petition to get him on the ballot in South Carolina. That was after the deadline, so nice job, Kanye. Some filing deadlines that he's missed.
Yeah.
He's missed now Alabama, Colorado, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Michigan, Montana, Nevada, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, West Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. That's to get on the ballot. He's about to miss this week Alaska, California, Connecticut, Hawaii, Kansas, and Maine. Maryland, Nebraska, Ohio, South Dakota, Vermont, Wisconsin, and Washington. I'm sure you can see he does not have enough states to win there, even in the theoretical world. I'm just pointing it out.
I think it's remarkable. This must be the first time there's ever been a presidential candidate who is, trying to get on the ballot and running and making a show of running while his equally famous wife is issuing public statements saying, my husband struggles with mental illness.
By the way, that was a great statement.
It was a fantastic statement.
I'm going to put that in the homework. You should read it.
It was a fantastic statement about mental illness and, and how it should be treated and how we should think about it. It was a wonderful statement. But Kanye West is still...
should not be president, yes.
Is still running.
In fact, I would say that is the only positive thing that's come out of this misbegotten campaign. Kim Kardashian's statement about bipolar disorder. I'm going to link to it. You should definitely have a look at it.
You should.
Just quickly, Kanye this week said, I will beat Biden off of write-ins. And that is the only way he could possibly do it. But let me tell you the write-in situation. Write-in candidates are always allowed in 9 states, Alabama, Iowa, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Wyoming. and they're never allowed in Arkansas, Hawaii, Louisiana, Mississippi, Nevada, New Mexico, South Carolina, and South Dakota. Okay, so he's missing 8 states there.
Yeah.
None of those 16 states really matter that much apart from maybe Pennsylvania. But he's already missed out on Colorado and Indiana as far as filing deadlines because you have to file to be a write-in candidate as well in a lot of states.
Yeah.
So he's about to miss out on North Carolina. So that's Kanye.
So, Peppers, if you were convinced that Kanye was going to win the election, I hope that we've dissuaded you of that.
What I'm trying to point out is that he can't even run a reasonable race to even interfere with Joe Biden at the rate things are going at the moment. And when he finally gets polling and it's going to be at like 2%, then I think he will. Like I said 3 weeks ago, he will then, I think, what the hell am I doing?
Yes.
But yeah, we'll see. Anyway, enough of that. Look up in the homework in the blurb for Kim Kardashian's statement because it's fantastic.
Very good, yes.
Unlike his campaign. I'm going to skip past policy because we're running out of time. Portland. Most Portland news is out of date now, of course, because it appears like it's over.
Yes.
I'm going to skip past most of what I want to say. Do you have anything to say about Portland?
Well, Trump did issue a statement this afternoon saying that the troops were not leaving. Well, I think it's been referred to as a phased withdrawal. Chad Wolf was talking about having them stationed nearby the city. What Trump is actually saying now is the Oregon police have 2 days to clean this up. Otherwise, we're sending in the National Guard.
But they're not going to clean it up. They were trying to clean up for a month beforehand. Yeah. It's a complete myth, this, by the way, that the Oregon police and the Portland police were just sitting around with their thumbs up their asses doing nothing.
No,
The reason why those those activists, I try not to use the word protesters because as soon as you say that, someone goes, oh, they're rioters. So I just use the word activists, which is right down the middle.
I'm going to call them protesters
okay, that's
despite
fine.
The people who call them
whatever.
rioters.
But anyway, the reason these activists are like super protesters with their lasers and their shields and all the rest of it, and they seem to be able to take endless amounts of tear gas, is because they've been practicing for the last 2 months against the Portland police. It's like this evolutionary thing where the two of them, the cat and mouse, just getting better and better at dealing with each other.
Evolutionary thing. Okay, speaking of animal metaphors, Trump hilariously described Portland as a beehive of terrorists.
Of terrorists?
Yeah. Now, does that sound like an odd metaphor to you? Like, I've often heard the term wasp's nest of terrorists.
Sure.
Or even nest of terror, or even just hive of terrorists. But saying beehive of terrorists, like, to the vast majority of people, beehive is something with positive connotations.
That's good.
I'm widening up my speech here. We talk about something being like, that's a beehive of activity. Beehives give honey. Bees pollinate flowers. We generally regard bees positively.
Yeah, domesticated.
I think, yes.
They're not terrorists.
As opposed to, say, wasps. Now, I think one of the things that this statement indicates is Trump's complete alienation from the world of animals. Basically, all animals are a source of terror to him. Bees are, they're out there to sting him. And I think this does all relate back to what Mary Trump says about Fred Trump hated animals, never allowed pets. Trump himself has never had pets. He's one of the first presidents ever not to have a pet. Like, even Andrew Jackson kept an alligator in the bathtub, which he would use to freak the guests out. Calvin Coolidge had pygmy hippos. Every pygmy hippo in existence in the United States is descended from Calvin Coolidge's pygmy hippos.
I did not know
who were
that.
named Gumdrop and Gumdrop 2. So having pets in the White House is normal as a kind of humanizing thing, not something that Trump goes into. And this is the first time I've ever heard the word beehive used negatively like that.
There's some really interesting information in there, especially about the pygmy hippos.
You can look up my article on the conversation, Politics on Four Legs. I wrote it in 2013.
Is this homework?
About the significance of presidential pets.
Okay.
I didn't mention...
Sign in your own articles for homework.
I did not mention the pygmy hippos.
Go on to your head, all this peer review. Okay, I'm putting it in there.
Yes.
All right. By the way, as someone whose parents didn't let me get pets, I'm quite offended by your assertion that turns people into like Trump. I mean, because I didn't...
Do you have pets now?
Well, I'm about to get some whippets because I didn't get Because I
Yeah.
didn't have pets as a kid. Now I just follow around other people's dogs going, oh, look at him. Oh.
No,
so
but I
that's-
think it
that's
wasn't.
the other way you can go.
It wasn't just that he wasn't allowed pets. It was this particularly hostile attitude towards animals, which is very much reflected in Trump's language. Because what's Trump's favorite insult?
Dog.
Like a dog.
Like a dog.
You know, he got fired like a dog.
Yeah.
'Cause-
He ate marmalade like a
so
dog.
many-
It
yeah.
just doesn't matter. It's
Yeah,
just like a
everything
dog.
is like a dog. He's got a fairly pathological hostility towards animals.
Okay, let's talk the suburbs quickly, which is what this Portland thing was all about. The battle for the suburbs.
Yes.
I mean, the polling battle for the suburbs. When we left this topic last time, Trump was, it was a New York Times Center poll, I remember we talked about, where Trump was doing 38-59 amongst
Yeah.
voters in the suburbs, 21-point gap.
Yes.
That's not good. This is a group that Republicans won until quite recently.
Yep.
And Trump trailed Joe Biden in this case by his approval was 38-59.
Yeah.
He trailed Joe Biden by 16 points, 51 to 35.
And
Joe
suburban
Biden.
vote, it has to be pointed out, are very important in swing states. Suburbs
Yeah.
of Philadelphia, suburbs of Cincinnati, suburbs of Detroit, suburbs of Phoenix now are in play. Yes.
North Carolina as well.
Yeah.
Yes, and by the way, when we're talking the suburbs, I imagine he would have, of all the things Trump would have least liked to have seen during Portland, the wall of mums would have absolutely terrified him.
Oh, yeah.
Because because they looked like suburban mums. They were suburban mums, and that is the last thing, the last kind of image he wanted to see on people's screens. The suburban mums coming to conflict with his police.
Yes.
So he would have been terrified by that. But anyway, in terms of how's this going? This is an interesting poll I found from Hill Harris. 77% of respondents say they're concerned that crime is rising in the nation's cities. This was this week. 46% of respondents said they were concerned about rising crime in their own communities.
Sorry, what was that?
46%.
46%,
said,
right.
yeah, in their own communities, 77% across the nation.
Yep.
Right. Now those numbers are rising. So it may be working to a certain extent, trying to make this election about crime. That doesn't mean they think he's the solution to the crime. Of course, they might think he's part of the problem. But if he's trying to make crime the issue, it may be starting to work. But conflicting polls on that as well. In Michigan, YouGov, 76% of registered voters say that it's very important to stop the spread of coronavirus.
Yes.
73% say it's very important to get economic relief to the people. 31% say it's very important to limit BLM protests.
Absolutely.
And that might be why he's moved out of Michigan.
Look, I think, you can ask people about what do they think about a certain issue. That's very different from ascertaining how important that issue is to them or how much they're thinking about it. And my guess is, obviously people being concerned about crime in their own communities, it's going to be a lot more important. There is what the political scientists term a sociotropic concern with crime in the nation as a whole, which is what Trump is trying to tap into. But yeah, I suspect that 31% figure is fairly reflective in general of how much people care about law and order issues in the campaign. And I think that's mostly concentrated among Trump's own supporters. The other thing is, though, as we have discussed ad nauseum on this podcast, is people's concern about crime is rising while Trump is president.
Yes.
That is not actually good for the incumbent president generally, because as much as he tries to say, well, this is happening in Democratic-run cities and this is going to be Joe Biden's America, it's a bridge too far for most people.
Yeah, he keeps running a opponent's campaign rather than an incumbent's campaign.
Yes.
There also, there's the other thing this week with the suburbs was we've talked about the AFFH repeal before. Trump announced to suburban housewives, I'll read this tweet, "I am happy to inform all of the people living their suburban lifestyle dream that you will no longer be bothered or financially hurt by having low-income housing built in your neighborhood. Your housing prices will go up based on the market and crime will go down. I've rescinded the Obama-Biden AFFH rule. Enjoy." Could you be less subtle? But anyway, for those who, you mentioned this a little bit a few weeks back.
Yes.
just for those who don't know what this is about, he's been talking about this a lot. So I just want to explain very briefly. The AFFH regulation was from 2015, essentially required those communities that were receiving grants from the housing department to complete lengthy assessments where they collect data and report on everything from labour market outcomes to educational quality, etc., to work out if they're providing fair housing. Yes. Essentially, it's a data reportage requirement, so they can see who is providing fair housing, who isn't. That's all it is. And the Trump rule that he has brought in requires that the recipients of federal housing funds now simply need to take some action, quote, rationally related to promoting fair housing, which means nothing. Yeah. In addition, the definition of fair housing has been broadened to now not to include either the absence of discrimination, that housing is affordable, that it's decent, that it's safe, and that it's sanitary. So sanitary. If you're doing any of those things, that's fair housing now. Okay, you qualify for the rule. So basically, the rule's now meaningless. There is no data. It doesn't matter. Yeah. And if they did it in a haphazard way, it's going to lose in court. But I just want to ask you as well, to see if we got anything else to say about this. Yeah. But I can't believe more people haven't noticed that this is about the Fair Housing Act, which is the act that Donald Trump was sued for violating in the 1970s for racial discrimination. He is defanging the very act that he had to settle under. Yes. Which it's amazing it hasn't been mentioned more often. It is.
It's one of these problems that we're just all so numb to this shit by this point. Yeah.
Do you have anything to say about any of this stuff? Suburbs, AFFH, Portland, any of that?
I think that this is all pretty self-evident what's going on, what Trump's pitch is. There is plenty of data out there to say that people of all political persuasions, if they're wealthy enough to buy a house in a nice suburb, they don't like low-income housing being built there. So I can see what the political maneuver is here. But as you've pointed out, there was so little enforcement of this rule, which was so watered down. Yes. It's not like people are magically going to notice low-income housing disappearing from their neighbourhoods, or something like that. So, so it's disgusting. It is incredibly racialized, and for everyone who sees Trump as some kind of populist, some kind of hero of working-class America, he's basically touting, "I'm not going to let poor people into your neighbourhood." Yeah. Why can he get away with that? Because everybody understands the term low-income housing in the United States has connotations of minorities. Yeah.
The only thing I would add is just way back on Portland is that we shouldn't confuse the Portland operation. I've already said this on the show, but I want to emphasize to everyone, the Portland operation with all the other operations going around America. Because a lot of people are going, oh, it's spreading Chicago and the stormtroopers are everywhere. No. Portland is the only place where they did that. Yeah. Every other city, they're actually working with the police. Yes. They're doing proper work. There's nothing dodgy about it, and it's completely appropriate what they're doing in the other cities. Now, sure,
I'd have to know more about what's happening in the other cities before I agree with
that's okay. You don't have to.
That it's all completely appropriate.
I could read it out to you, but we have about 3 minutes. Okay. So I won't. As I said, 3 minutes left. Dave, take your pick. DACA, Germany troops, or something else?
Let's talk about Germany troops.
Okay, all right. So the Germany troops draw down. 12,000 are leaving, 24,000 staying in Germany. So it's not going to make a huge difference in Germany. No. The 5,600 troops are going to other parts of Europe, 6,000 coming back. They're going to Italy, Belgium, and Poland. Trump said, we're reducing the force because they're not paying their bills. It's very simple. They're delinquent. That's obviously not true because they're going from Germany that spends 1.3% of its defense spending. He's talking about NATO with their defense spending. To Italy, that has 1.4% of its defence spending, and to Belgium, that has 0.93% of its GDP spent on defence. Yeah. So clearly, that is garbage. I don't know the real reason. Romney's against it. The Germany don't care. According to a Pew survey last year, 15% of Germans said that the bases were important to their national security. So no one gives a stuff. It really doesn't make any difference. What do you got to say, Dr. Dave?
Well, interestingly, those German facilities were actually important to the US during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, which are still going on, because that means if troops need to be medevaced to a Western country, that facility is there for them. So that was actually
the bases are still there. They've still got 24,000 people.
So that was quite important. But I mean, the thing that has always I won't say perplexed me about this, because nothing about Trump's fuckwittery actually perplexes me that much
Now
anymore.
he's warming up.
There is this thing, we've got to make the European countries pay more for their defence. None of this has ever led to a reduction in US defence spending.
Of course not.
Or defence commitments.
As if US spends a lot of money because of NATO. They spend money because they want to spend money on defence.
Exactly. US defence spending Trump touts how much his defence spending is rising. So it's really pointless. What is the actual achievement of getting European countries to spend more on defence when you're also spending more on defence? Because
it's winning.
And this is often touted as one of Trump's great achievements. Obama wanted them to spend more, but he couldn't get them to spend more. Trump's got them to spend more, but for what purpose? Like, I don't think in the end that the American taxpayer is going to vote on the basis of now the German taxpayer is paying more.
Just wait till Luxembourg spends 2% of their GDP on defence.
Yes.
Okay, we have come to an end. I can see the clock. Dr. Dave, thank you very much for this very special blind edition.
Thanks very much to 2SER.
Thank you so much to 2SER. You guys are very. We have a very silent but very strong fellow here helping us out. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And see you guys next week, maybe on Wednesday, and maybe not. I'll let you know. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.